She didn't laugh because it was funny. She laughed because she knew everyone was watching. At the top of the glass staircase inside the Dallas Grand Hotel, Victoria Hale stood draped in a crimson dress that cost more than most families made in 3 months. Her hair shimmered under the chandelier, her voice crisp and cutting as she commanded the attention of board members, investors, and politicians who hung on her every word. But then came the interruption. A mechanic, his shirt still marked with the faintest trace of grease, stepped cautiously into the glittering room. His name was Marcus Carter, and he had been called in for one purpose: to fix the car Victoria had flaunted in front of her guests, the car that had betrayed her in the middle of her entrance. The humiliation was hers, until she turned it around. "Fix this engine," she said loudly enough for every crystal glass to freeze mid-air, "and I'll marry you on the spot." The crowd erupted. Some gasped, most laughed. They weren't laughing with Marcus. They were laughing at him, and for a moment he considered walking away, but instead he set down his tool bag with deliberate care. His eyes met hers, not with anger, not with fear, but with something else entirely. A quiet defiance. Victoria tilted her head, amused but unsettled. Nobody had ever looked at her like that in front of her own kingdom. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Marcus Carter wasn't just fixing an engine that night. He was unlocking something far older, far heavier, a chain of secrets that linked his family and hers, stretching back decades. The wager was meant to humiliate him, but as the room leaned in, and as his hands began to work with unshakable precision, every tick of his broken wristwatch brought them closer to a revelation none of them were prepared to face. The question wasn't whether he could fix the engine. The question was what would break first: the machine, the woman who mocked him, or the empire she stood upon. And before we continue, I want to ask you, if you were Marcus, standing in that room full of people laughing at you, would you have accepted her challenge, or walked away? Let me know in the comments below, because this story is just getting started, and the first twist will change everything. The silence after his words was heavier than the laughter that came before it. Marcus hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. All he said was, "I'll do it." For a heartbeat, the gala seemed to stop breathing. A server froze mid-step, a tray of champagne glasses trembling in his hand. A senator leaned forward, half smirking, waiting for the first mistake. And in the corner, Richard Callahan, the man who had bankrolled half of Hale Motors, adjusted his cufflinks with a curious little smile, as though he'd been waiting for this moment all night. Victoria, however, remained composed. She turned her back to Marcus, glass in hand, as if the matter had already been settled. To her, the show had just begun. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying like a queen addressing her court, "watch closely. Tonight we will see if grease can shine under crystal chandeliers." The room rippled with laughter again, and for the first time, Marcus felt every eye press against his skin like heat. But he didn't flinch. He rolled up his sleeves. The car, her pride and joy, sat in the center of the ballroom on display. A vintage Hale prototype, one of a kind, meant to signal power and legacy. But now its engine was silent, stubborn, dead. He approached it slowly, each step deliberate, until the smell of expensive cologne gave way to the faint metallic tang of machinery. He touched the hood, cool beneath his calloused palm, and exhaled. The broken watch on his wrist ticked unevenly. His father's watch. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "He won't even last 5 minutes." But Marcus didn't hear them. His mind had already shifted into the rhythm he knew best: wrenches, bolts, connections, timing, the silent music of machines that no CEO, no investor, no smirking onlooker could ever understand. Victoria leaned against the balcony rail above, watching like a hawk. She didn't just want him to fail. She needed him to. Every second he succeeded was a threat, not just to her pride, but to something she hadn't yet named even to herself. And so the question lingered in the air like static. Would this mechanic fix more than just an engine tonight? Would he expose cracks in a legacy that was never as flawless as it appeared? The answer was coming, but not yet. Because just as Marcus tightened the first bolt, a voice from the back of the hall called out, sharp and mocking, "Careful, boy. If you ruin it, you'll owe her more than marriage." The crowd erupted again, crueler this time. Marcus kept working, and the watch kept ticking. Before we go any further, I want you to picture this. You're standing alone in a room where every laugh is against you, every glance is waiting for you to fail. Do you keep your head down and push through, or do you walk away with your dignity intact? Tell me in the comments. Because Marcus's decision here is only the beginning of what's about to unravel. The first bolt came loose with a faint metallic click, and Marcus set it carefully aside. He didn't look up, didn't answer the laughter or the whispers. His silence became its own kind of statement, a resistance sharper than any words he could have thrown back at them. The gala crowd leaned in. The musicians, sensing the shift, allowed their instruments to fall into a hesitant hush. The only sound now was the faint clink of metal against metal, and the ticking of that battered old watch. It wasn't just a repair, it was a performance. Victoria sipped her champagne, lips curved into a smile that was far too calm. To anyone else it looked like confidence, but in the subtle flicker of her eyes, in the way she tightened her grip on the stem of the glass, there was something else. She was remembering a night years ago, another engine, another failure. But she pushed the thought away before it could take shape. "Time is money," she called down, her voice sweet as poison. "Don't keep us waiting, Carter." Her words drew another round of snickers from the board members at her table. One even pulled out his phone to record, convinced this would be a story worth replaying. But then, something shifted. The crowd, so eager to laugh, began to watch instead. They saw how Marcus's hands moved, precise, deliberate, confident. He didn't rush, didn't fumble. He knew where every part belonged, as if he'd built the machine himself. And with each adjustment, with each decisive motion, their laughter dimmed. Only Victoria kept smiling, though her eyes had narrowed, as if trying to see past the mechanic's calm exterior into the storm she suspected waited beneath. Richard Callahan, sitting quietly at the back, leaned forward now. His gaze wasn't mocking, it was calculating. The watch ticked, the seconds stretched, and then suddenly the engine coughed. It wasn't much, just a flicker, a stuttering gasp of life, but it was enough to send a ripple of silence through the entire ballroom. Marcus didn't flinch. He tightened one last connection, twisted the final bolt into place, and stepped back. The engine roared, not quietly, not weakly. It came alive with a force that seemed to shake the room itself, the sound bouncing off glass and marble, drowning out every breath, every whisper, every laugh. For a long moment, nobody moved. Marcus wiped his hands on his shirt, his face expressionless, as if this was nothing more than another day at his garage. The silence broke with a single clap, not from Victoria, not from Richard, but from somewhere deep in the crowd. Then another, until the very room that had mocked him erupted into reluctant applause. Every hand except hers. Victoria Hale stood at the balcony rail, eyes fixed on him, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, she descended the staircase, each heel striking the marble like a drumbeat. She stopped only a few feet away from Marcus. Her voice carried across the hall, calm, almost too calm. "Well," she said, tilting her head, "I suppose congratulations are in order." The crowd leaned in, waiting. Marcus said nothing. Victoria's smile widened, though her eyes had hardened to ice. "You'll forgive me, won't you? A joke's a joke. Surely you didn't think—" She let the sentence hang, "that I meant it." Gasps, murmurs, shifting eyes. The promise she'd made, the one every person in that hall had heard, had just been swept away with a flick of her tongue. Marcus's jaw tightened. His silence grew heavier than the applause that had filled the room moments before. And just when it seemed he might speak, when it seemed he might shatter the silence with something that could never be taken back, A voice from the back cut through the tension like glass breaking. "Miss Hale," Richard Callahan said smoothly, "perhaps we should talk about what this mechanic really just proved tonight." Every head turned. Every whisper stopped. And for the first time, Victoria's mask slipped. "So let me ask you, if someone mocked you in public, promised you the world just to humiliate you, and then broke their word after you proved yourself, what would you do? Stay silent like Marcus, or strike back in front of them all? Tell me in the comments. Because what Richard Callahan reveals next will flip the entire story upside down." Richard Callahan's voice didn't rise, but it carried across the ballroom with the weight of someone used to being heard. Every word landed like it belonged to the marble itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, standing now, adjusting the sharp lapel of his midnight black suit, "what we just witnessed was not an accident. It wasn't luck. It was mastery." The applause that had flickered awkwardly moments ago swelled again, this time with conviction. Heads nodded. Glasses were raised. Whispers turned into murmurs of approval. All except one. Victoria Hale remained motionless, her smile frozen, her eyes locked on Marcus as if the entire world had just betrayed her. Richard continued, slow and deliberate. "There's not a single one of you here who could have pulled off what this man just did, and yet—" He gestured toward Marcus with an open palm. "You all laughed. You dismissed him. Until he proved you wrong." The weight of his words shifted the air. Investors shifted in their seats. Executives traded looks. A few even avoided Victoria's gaze altogether. Marcus didn't move. He kept his hands clasped in front of him, calm, though the broken watch on his wrist ticked unevenly, echoing in his mind like a metronome of unfinished promises. Victoria's jaw tightened. She forced a polite laugh, though it scraped against the air like broken glass. "Oh, Richard, don't be dramatic. It was only a party game. A little entertainment." Her dismissal drew nervous chuckles from a few guests. But the seed had been planted. Marcus had proven himself. And the cracks in her command, invisible to most, were beginning to show. Richard's eyes, however, stayed on Marcus, measuring, calculating, almost recognizing. "Tell me," Richard said smoothly, leaning forward just slightly. "Where exactly did you learn to do that, Mr. Carter?" The question froze Marcus more than the mockery had. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Because how could he explain? How could he tell this room full of power-hungry strangers that his skill wasn't taught in classrooms or polished in workshops, but carved from years of watching his father, the man whose name hadn't been spoken in this city for decades, stripped of everything by the very company whose logo gleamed on the hood he'd just repaired? The silence stretched. The crowd waited. Victoria's eyes narrowed. And then, just before Marcus could speak, Richard's gaze dropped to the broken watch ticking faintly on Marcus's wrist. His smile faltered, only for the briefest second, before it returned sharper than before. He knew. What did Richard recognize in that old, battered watch? Why did Victoria's father's name suddenly weigh heavy in the silence that followed? Before Marcus could answer, the gala itself seemed to turn into a stage for secrets far bigger than a broken engine. Because this night wasn't about marriage, it wasn't about humiliation, it was about uncovering a truth both Marcus and Victoria had been running from their entire lives. And it was only just beginning. The air thickened, though no one said it out loud. Richard's question still lingered like smoke over the ballroom, and all eyes rested on Marcus. He could feel their gazes pressing into him, the clink of crystal glasses stalling, forks resting mid-air on half-finished plates. Victoria's lips curled with impatience, but her eyes, they betrayed something else. Not just annoyance, not just contempt, but fear. Because she knew. She knew Marcus wasn't just some mechanic dragged into her wager for amusement. She knew the story he carried, one tied to a scandal the city had buried years ago. A scandal her family had paid handsomely to erase. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came. Instead, The broken watch on his wrist gave a faint, stubborn tick. That sound, too faint for the crowd to hear, but loud enough for him, pulled him backward through memory. A garage in South Chicago. Oil-stained hands that belonged to a man who wore that very watch before him. A father's voice saying, "One day this will mean something more than time. One day it'll tell the truth." The ballroom blurred for Marcus just for a moment, and when he blinked, Richard Callahan was staring directly at the watch, his expression tight, almost cautious. Richard raised his glass slowly, cutting through the tension with forced charm. "Well," he said, "wherever you learned it, Mr. Carter, it was unforgettable." He sipped, but his eyes never left Marcus. Laughter trickled back into the room, hesitant but eager to smooth over discomfort. The music swelled again. Conversations resumed in patches, but the spell wasn't broken, only stretched thinner, ready to snap. Victoria leaned toward Marcus, her voice low and sharp, her perfume sweet enough to suffocate. "Don't think this changes anything. You embarrassed me, and men who embarrass me never last long in this city." Marcus held her gaze. For the first time that evening, he allowed a thin, knowing smile. "Engines don't lie," he murmured, his voice steady. "But people do." Her eyes widened, just enough to reveal that his words had cut deeper than she expected. Because Marcus hadn't just fixed a machine tonight. He'd cracked open a secret Victoria had spent years protecting. And somewhere in the glitter of champagne and chandeliers, Richard Callahan was already dialing a number under the table, his fingers steady, his voice hushed. "He's alive. I'll explain later, but it's him. It has to be him." Who was Richard calling? What truth was buried in Marcus's past that could shake Hale Motors itself? And why did Victoria react with fear, not anger, when Marcus spoke of lies? The gala wasn't just a test of skill. It had become the ignition for something far more dangerous. And before the night was over, Marcus would learn that some engines, once started, can never be turned off. The orchestra's violins climbed back into their practiced rhythm, but the room hadn't recovered. People laughed louder than usual, conversations sparked with sudden energy, all tricks to mask the discomfort still lingering like an aftertaste. Marcus stayed rooted, his rough hands folded loosely before him, grease still faint beneath his nails. No suit, no polished shoes, just a mechanic dropped in a sea of velvet gowns and tailored tuxedos, yet somehow he had become the axis of the night. Richard Callahan's call ended as quietly as it began. He slid the phone back into his pocket, lifted his champagne glass, and raised it just high enough for only Marcus to notice. It wasn't a toast. It was a signal. Marcus didn't return it. He didn't move at all. But inside, his pulse hammered. Victoria noticed. Of course she did. Nothing escaped her. Her chair scraped softly against the marble as she leaned closer. Her voice sweetened for the crowd, yet sharpened for his ear. "You think you've earned respect tonight?" she whispered. "You're wrong. All you've done is put a target on your back." Marcus finally turned toward her, his jaw set, his voice low, almost calm. "If respect is dangerous in this city, maybe danger's overdue." Her eyes narrowed, the corners of her lips twitching into a smile that didn't reach them, a smile that promised war. Then, the ballroom doors opened. A man in a dark uniform slipped in, his presence almost swallowed by the grandeur of the evening. But Marcus noticed. Richard noticed. Even Victoria noticed. The man moved swiftly to Richard's side, leaning down to murmur something into his ear. Richard's smile faltered. His grip on the champagne stem tightened. Marcus caught only a fragment, a single word, but it was enough to set his blood cold. Garage. Richard's eyes cut to Marcus immediately, sharp and unblinking, before returning to the messenger. He gave a curt nod, then stood with sudden ease. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced smoothly. "A minor matter calls my attention. Enjoy the evening." He strode out, the messenger close behind. The door shut softly, but the weight of his absence filled the room. Victoria leaned back, triumphant. "See? Even Richard has better things to do than indulge you." But Marcus wasn't listening. His mind had already left the ballroom. Garage. The word wasn't random. It wasn't meaningless. It was a reminder, a place, a secret. One that somebody, maybe Richard, maybe Victoria, maybe someone neither of them had named, had just unlocked. What garage had Richard's messenger whispered about? Why did Richard leave so abruptly after looking at Marcus? And why did Marcus's heart sink, as if that word was a key turning in a lock he prayed would never open again? Because before the night ended, Marcus would be forced to return to that place, and what waited there wasn't an engine, but the truth. Marcus didn't wait for dessert. He didn't wait for the polite applause that followed every speech, or the staged laughter that masked every dagger of mockery. He simply turned and walked. The chandeliers above gleamed like 1,000 eyes tracking his every step, but no one dared stop him. They whispered, yes. They sneered behind polished glasses, yes. But none stepped in his way, except Victoria. "Leaving so soon?" she called after him, her voice lilting across the marble like silk hiding steel. Marcus paused. He turned, his frame outlined by the gold light spilling from the ballroom, the broken watch on his wrist catching just enough gleam to mock its own decay. "I didn't come here for you," he said, "and I'm not staying for you." A gasp fluttered through the guests, but Victoria only smiled wider. "Then who did you come here for, Marcus?" she asked, her voice tightening around his name. Marcus didn't answer. He stepped into the shadows of the hallway, and the heavy doors sealed behind him. Outside, the air bit colder. Chicago's skyline stretched jagged against the night, Lake Michigan's black waters swallowing the moonlight whole. Marcus's boots echoed down the stone steps, each step pulling him farther from the glitter and closer to memory. Garage. The word burned in his chest. He knew exactly which garage it was, though he wished he didn't. It wasn't just any garage. It was his father's, the same garage where his childhood had ended in the shriek of metal and the scent of burning oil. The same garage Hale Motors had seized after a lawsuit his family never recovered from. The same garage where... No. He couldn't even finish the thought. But someone else had. Someone had gone digging. And Richard Callahan, the man who looked at his broken watch as if it were a confession, was already on his way there. Marcus's fists clenched. He needed to get there first. The city blurred past as he drove his beat-up Chevy through streets he hadn't dared return to in years. The hum of the engine was steady, but his pulse was not. Streetlights flickered, memories clawed, and then, at last, the garage appeared. Boarded windows, rusted locks, graffiti scrawled across the metal doors. To anyone else, it was an abandoned shell. To Marcus, it was a grave. He stepped out, gravel crunching underfoot, breath clouding in the night air. His hand hovered over the chain that bound the door, but before he could move it, he froze. The chain was already cut. The door was already ajar. Someone was inside. Who had entered his father's garage before him? What secret was worth breaking into a place long left for dead? And what truth would Marcus find inside? A truth that could ruin Victoria, expose Hale Motors, and tear open the wound he had tried to bury for years? Because behind that door, the past wasn't waiting. It was alive. The chain dangled loose, swaying gently in the cold air, its links clicking like a warning bell. Marcus's hand hovered there for a beat too long. He wasn't ready, but the night wasn't waiting. He pushed the door. The hinges groaned, the sound tearing through the silence of the street. Inside, the darkness pressed heavy, carrying the stale scent of oil, rust, and time itself. The garage had been untouched for years. Or so he thought. His boots crunched against broken glass as he stepped inside. The air felt wrong, too disturbed, too alive. Then he heard it. A faint shuffle, the creak of wood shifting under weight. Someone was here. Marcus's jaw tightened. He reached instinctively to the tool belt he no longer wore, fingers brushing only the empty air at his side. He wasn't armed. "Who's there?" His voice was low, steady, though his pulse betrayed him. No answer, only silence. He moved deeper, every step careful, deliberate. His eyes adjusted to the faint glow spilling through cracks in the boarded windows. Dust floated like ghosts in the beams. And then he saw it. The workbench. His father's old bench, scarred with years of labor, still standing at the far wall. But it wasn't empty. On top of it lay a folder. Thick, clean, too clean for this forgotten place. Marcus stepped closer, his breath catching. The folder was marked in sharp block letters, Hale Motors Confidential. His hand hovered above it, but before he could touch, a voice cut through the shadows. "You shouldn't be here." Marcus spun. A figure stepped forward from the darkness, tall, broad-shouldered, a cap pulled low over his eyes. His suit was too fine for this neighborhood, his shoes too polished for this floor, and in his hand, a gun glinted. Who was this man guarding secrets inside Marcus's father's garage? Why was Hale Motors' confidential file hidden here of all places? And how much of Marcus's past was about to be rewritten by the stranger's next words? Because in that moment, Marcus realized the truth. Fixing the engine had been a performance. But stepping into this garage, that was the real test. The gun didn't waver. Its black barrel gleamed beneath the faint moonlight seeping through the boards, steady in the stranger's grip. Marcus froze, his breath shallow, his eyes darting between the weapon and the man's shadowed face. "I said," the voice repeated, deeper now, edged with warning, "you shouldn't be here." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing." The man didn't smile. He took one slow step forward, the crunch of glass sharp under his polished sole. His cap tilted just enough to reveal a scar running across his jawline, thin, pale, like an old wound that never fully healed. Marcus's pulse hammered. Whoever this man was, he wasn't random. Nobody came here by accident. "What do you want?" Marcus demanded. The stranger's eyes flicked toward the folder on the bench, then back to Marcus. "That doesn't belong to you." Marcus swallowed hard. "And it belongs to you?" The man raised the gun a little higher, steady, deliberate. "It belongs to the people who paid me to keep it safe." The words hung like lead. "Paid me." Marcus glanced at the folder again. Hale Motors, his father's garage, and now, hired muscle. "Why hide it here?" Marcus asked, stalling, probing. For the first time, the stranger's jaw clenched. His silence was answer enough. Because this garage wasn't random either. Someone wanted Marcus to find it. Someone wanted this moment to happen. The man's finger twitched against the trigger. "Last chance. Walk away." Marcus's chest rose and fell. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "One day, this will mean something more than time. One day, it'll tell the truth." He looked down at the broken watch on his wrist. Its uneven tick filled the silence between them, and then Marcus said quietly, "If I walk away now, I'll never know why my father died." The man's eyes flashed, just for a second, just long enough. Marcus lunged. Did Marcus manage to disarm the stranger, or did he just gamble his life on a broken memory? What secret inside the folder was worth killing for? And why did the scarred man's eyes flicker at the mention of Marcus's father? Because in that instant, the fight wasn't just for survival. It was for the truth itself. Marcus lunged low, aiming for the stranger's wrist, the one gripping the gun. The man was fast, faster than Marcus expected, twisting sideways, the weapon cracking against Marcus's shoulder as they slammed into the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the garage like thunder. Marcus grunted, his breath forced out in a rush, but he didn't let go. His hands clawed at the stranger's arm, fighting for control. The gun tilted dangerously, the muzzle scraping across the floor. One wrong angle, one slip, and the shot would end everything. The man cursed, his voice harsh, trained. This wasn't his first fight. He shoved Marcus back, his weight bearing down, the cold steel of the barrel now pressing against Marcus's ribs. Marcus froze, but only for a heartbeat. His eyes darted upward, catching the faint shimmer of a wrench lying half-hidden under the workbench. His father's wrench. With a surge of desperation, Marcus shifted, twisting his hips hard, sending both bodies rolling. The gun clattered against the floor, skidding into the dark. The man cursed again, scrambling, but Marcus's hand shot out, fingers curling around the cold steel of the wrench. He swung. The clang rang out sharp, metal against bone. The stranger staggered, dazed, dropping to one knee. Marcus didn't stop. He pressed forward, wrench raised, breath ragged. But the man lifted a hand, not to fight, but to signal. "Wait!" His voice was strained, but his eyes were sharp, pleading. "If you knew the truth," he rasped, blood tracing down his temple, "you'd know I'm not your enemy." Marcus froze mid-swing, the wrench trembling in his grip. The man coughed, steadying himself, his scarred jaw tightening as he whispered, "They killed your father. Because of that." His chin lifted toward the folder on the workbench. What secret inside the folder was powerful enough to kill for? Why did the scarred stranger claim not to be Marcus's enemy? And who exactly had hired him? Hale Motors, or someone else hiding in the shadows? Marcus had a choice now: finish the fight, or open the folder that could change everything. The wrench trembled in Marcus's hand, his breath shallow, his pulse roaring in his ears. The scarred stranger stayed crouched, one hand raised, the other pressing against the cut on his temple. "They killed your father because of that," he repeated, nodding toward the folder. His voice was hoarse but steady. "If you want the truth, open it. If you want to live, walk away." The words coiled around Marcus like chains. His father's face flashed in his mind. Calloused hands, tired eyes, a man who had built his life on loyalty to his craft, only to have it stripped from him in one brutal stroke. For years Marcus had buried that night under engines and silence, but now the past was sitting right in front of him. Marcus lowered the wrench, the sound of it striking the floor like a gavel. He turned slowly toward the workbench, toward the folder that gleamed unnaturally clean in this grave of rust and dust. The stranger didn't move. He only watched, his jaw tight, as if he already knew what Marcus was about to do. Marcus reached out. His fingers brushed the cardboard, rough against his skin. His chest rose once, twice. Then, with a sharp pull, he opened it. Pages spilled out, technical blueprints, financial records, confidential memos stamped with Hale Motors' seal. But one page caught him, a photograph. Marcus's throat tightened as he lifted it. His father stood in the picture, younger, proud, standing beside an engine unlike any Marcus had ever seen. Sleek, futuristic, years ahead of its time. And behind him, almost hidden in the frame, was another face. Richard Callahan. Why was Richard Callahan in the photograph with Marcus's father? What was the experimental engine that Hale Motors buried? And if Richard knew Marcus's father, why had he acted surprised at the gala? Marcus had uncovered the first thread of truth, but pulling it would unravel a story bigger than anything he could imagine. Marcus's hand shook as he held the photograph, the edges digging into his fingertips. His father, proud, smiling, alive in a way Marcus hadn't seen since boyhood. Beside him, the strange engine gleamed like something out of the future, and standing half in shadow, half in light, Richard Callahan. The scarred man pushed himself upright, leaning heavily against a support beam. His eyes never left Marcus. "You see it now," he muttered. Marcus turned, his voice hoarse. "Why is he in this picture? Why is Richard Callahan standing next to my father?" The man wiped the blood from his brow, the scar on his jaw catching the dim light. "Because your father wasn't just a mechanic. He was an inventor, and what he built—" He nodded toward the engine in the photograph, Could have changed everything. Cheaper, cleaner, unstoppable. Hale Motors would have gone from billion-dollar empire to ashes overnight. Marcus's grip on the photo tightened. So they stole it. The man's lips twisted bitterly. Stole it, buried it, and when your father refused to disappear quietly, they made sure he did. The words cut deeper than the wrench ever could. Marcus staggered back a step, the folder heavy in his hands, the weight of years crashing down at once. All the unanswered questions, all the nights spent staring at that broken watch, wondering why. But one thing didn't fit. One thing burned louder than the rest. Then why is Richard still alive? Marcus demanded. If he was part of it, why was he at the gala, acting like he'd never seen me before? The man's eyes narrowed. His silence stretched long enough for the shadows to grow thicker around them. Finally, he spoke. Quiet, heavy. Because Richard Callahan wasn't just part of it. Marcus's chest tightened. He was the one who ordered it. Did Richard Callahan really order Marcus's father's death? Why hide it for decades, only to leave breadcrumbs leading Marcus back now? And if Richard had known all along, why had he smiled at the broken watch, as if it meant something only he remembered? The answers were coming, but each one would cost Marcus more than he was ready to pay. The words echoed inside the garage, bouncing off rusted beams and broken glass. He was the one who ordered it. Marcus's knuckles whitened around the photograph. His father's smile stared back at him, frozen in time, standing beside the very man accused of betraying him. The scarred stranger steadied himself, wiping blood from his jaw, his gun long forgotten on the floor. "You weren't supposed to see this yet," he muttered. "But now you know." Marcus opened his mouth, but the sudden screech of tires outside cut him off. Headlights spilled through the gaps in the boards, flooding the garage with harsh beams. The sound of heels followed, sharp, deliberate, echoing against the pavement like a countdown. Victoria Hale. Her silhouette appeared in the doorway first, framed in the harsh glow of her luxury sedan. She stepped inside slowly, every inch of her presence polished, controlled, dangerous. "Well, well," she purred, her eyes sweeping the scene, Marcus clutching the folder, the stranger bloodied, the dust of violence still hanging in the air. "Isn't this poetic?" Marcus stiffened. "What are you doing here?" Victoria's smile widened. "Same as you, Marcus. Looking for answers." She tilted her head, her diamond earrings catching the faint light. "But unlike you, I already know how this story ends." The scarred man's jaw tightened. He has a right to know. Her eyes snapped toward him, sharp as glass. "And you have a contract. Don't forget who owns you." Marcus blinked. The pieces shifted. This man, this so-called stranger, wasn't freelancing. He was hers. Victoria took another step forward, her heels crunching over glass, her voice honeyed with cruelty. "Do you really think you've uncovered some hidden truth, Marcus? That photo, those blueprints, this garage, you think it's all about your father?" Her gaze locked on his, cold, unyielding. "It's about you." Why would Victoria claim the buried conspiracy was about Marcus, not his father? What role had he unknowingly played all along? And why did the scarred man, her enforcer, hesitate when she spoke, as if even he knew she was crossing a line? Marcus had thought he was chasing the past, but now the past was chasing him. Marcus stood frozen, the cold photograph burning in his palm. His father's smile, Richard's hand on his shoulder. It felt like a ghost pressing down on his chest. Victoria's heels clicked closer, each step deliberate, almost theatrical. She circled him like a lawyer circling a witness, her perfume mixing with the acrid dust of the garage. "You remind me so much of him," she whispered, her voice lower now, almost intimate. The same stubborn jawline, the same foolish pride. He never knew when to walk away. Marcus snapped his head toward her. "Stop talking about him like you knew him." Her laugh was soft, dangerous. "Knew him? Marcus, your father and I had meetings long before Richard came into the picture." She paused, letting the words sink like poison. "He trusted me." Marcus's stomach knotted. He wanted to demand the truth, to shake it out of her. But her eyes, those calculating blue eyes, warned him she was only feeding him crumbs. The scarred man shifted uncomfortably. His silence said more than her words ever could. "Why did he die?" Marcus demanded, his voice hoarse. "Why did they leave him out there?" Victoria tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Because he asked them to." The words hit him like a punch. Marcus staggered back. "That's a lie." Her smile never faltered. "Is it? Or is it just a truth you're not ready to swallow?" The scarred man finally spoke, his voice gravelly. "Victoria—" "Quiet," she snapped, her composure cracking for a second. Then softer to Marcus. "You want answers? Fine, find Richard. Look him in the eye. Ask him about the deal on Rockland Avenue 2002. Ask him whose signature is buried in those papers." Marcus's chest tightened. The photo, the documents, the blueprints, none of it mattered if the man behind it all could lie to his face and get away with it. Victoria leaned closer, her breath brushing his ear. "But be careful. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes—" Her lips curled into a cruel smile. "It buries you deeper." And with that, she turned on her heel, her diamond bracelets catching the light, and walked out of the garage like she owned the night itself. Marcus stood in the silence she left behind, his pulse pounding, his thoughts a storm. The scarred man picked up his jacket, but his eyes lingered on Marcus. "She's not wrong. Richard won't tell you everything. But if you press hard enough—" He hesitated, his voice dropping. "He'll slip." Marcus clenched the photograph. For years he thought his father's death was a closed wound. But now every answer came wrapped in riddles, and every riddle led back to Richard. What happened on Rockland Avenue in 2002? Why did Victoria claim Marcus's father chose to die? And why did the scarred man, her loyal enforcer, sound almost desperate for Marcus to keep digging? The storm was no longer about the past. It was about what Marcus would uncover next, and whether he'd live to tell it. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat in his car, the photo and folder spread across the passenger seat, lit only by the flickering glow of a dying street lamp. Victoria's words kept replaying, twisting like barbed wire in his head. Rockland Avenue, 2002. Whose signature is buried in those papers? By dawn, he was already driving, his beat-up Ford groaning as it left the city skyline behind. The further he went, the thinner the traffic became, the colder the air felt. His GPS sputtered directions until finally he pulled up to a stretch of Rockland Avenue that looked forgotten by time. The houses here sagged on their foundations, windows boarded, weeds curling up through cracked sidewalks. But at the far end, a warehouse loomed, its walls streaked with rust, its windows dark. A sign above the door hung crooked, the letters barely legible, Rockland Storage Supply. Marcus stepped out, gravel crunching beneath his boots. The air smelled of rain-soaked wood and something metallic, faint but sharp. He shoved the photo in his jacket pocket and pushed the heavy door. It creaked open, revealing a cavern of dust and silence. Inside, his footsteps echoed against bare concrete. Piles of rotting crates slumped against the walls. Rusted shelves leaned like skeletons. And then he saw it, a faded calendar still nailed to the wall. The year, 2002. Marcus's chest tightened. This was the place. He ran his hand across the dust-caked desk at the center of the room. Papers lay scattered, most crumbling with age. But beneath them, hidden under a warped ledger, he found a folder. Its edges were yellowed, but the label was still clear, Project Halcyon. His father's name was typed on the cover, and next to it, Richard Hale. Marcus's pulse thundered. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside were schematics, contracts, and permits, all signed. And there, at the bottom of one document, was a signature that made his breath catch. Not Richard's, not his father's. It was Victoria's. Before Marcus could process it, a sound sliced through the silence, a faint creak, like a floorboard shifting. He froze. Slowly, he lifted his eyes toward the shadows in the corner of the warehouse. Someone was here, watching. Who followed Marcus to Rockland Avenue? Was it one of Victoria's men, sent to tie off loose ends? Or was it Richard himself, waiting to see how far Marcus would go? And why was Victoria's signature hidden in the same document she told him about? The one she swore tied only Richard to his father's fate. Marcus had come looking for the past, but the past was already staring back at him. Marcus's throat tightened as he froze in place. The warehouse was silent again, but he knew what he heard. That wasn't the building groaning. That was a human step. He slowly closed the folder and slid it into his jacket. The paper crackled against his chest, loud in the suffocating quiet. "Who's there?" His voice echoed off the concrete walls, thin and shaky. No response. He took one careful step back toward the exit. Gravel and dirt crunched under his boot. And then, in the far corner, something shifted again. A silhouette. Too tall, too still, to be a trick of the light. Marcus's heart slammed against his ribs. He reached down and picked up a rusted pipe lying near the desk, gripping it tight like a lifeline. "You want me?" he called out, trying to sound braver than he felt. "Come out." The silence stretched. Then, a low chuckle. A man's voice, raspy, almost mocking. "You look just like him." Marcus's breath caught. "Who are you?" The figure stepped forward, just enough for the weak daylight slipping through the cracks to catch his outline. A heavy coat, broad shoulders, a limp in his right leg. He stopped halfway, still half-shrouded in shadow. "Doesn't matter who I am. What matters is you weren't supposed to find this place." Marcus gripped the pipe tighter. "Why? What happened here?" The man tilted his head. "Ask Richard. He'll lie, of course, but lies always leave stains." Marcus felt the weight of the folder against his chest. "Victoria sent you?" That earned a laugh, bitter. "Victoria doesn't send me. She owns me. There's a difference." Marcus's stomach dropped. This wasn't some random watcher. This was the scarred man again, the one from the garage. But why follow him here? Before Marcus could ask, the man stepped closer, his face barely visible in the dim light. His scar caught the faint glow, twisted like lightning across his jaw. "You think this is about your father, but it isn't." His voice dropped to a near growl. "It's about what you're willing to do when you learn the truth." Marcus swallowed hard. "And what truth is that?" The scarred man leaned closer, his words like gravel. "That the engine you fixed for her wasn't the first test. It was the last one." What did the scarred man mean? That Marcus's challenge with Victoria was a test? Who set it up, and why? Was his father's death part of the same game, stretching back decades? And why was Rockland Avenue still guarded, after all these years? Marcus thought he was unearthing history, but now it was clear. History had been waiting for him all along. Marcus's grip on the rusted pipe tightened until his knuckles whitened. The scarred man's words clung to the air like smoke. It wasn't the first test. It was the last one. Marcus's voice cracked, part fury, part disbelief. "What are you talking about? A test for what?" The scarred man smirked, though his eyes were tired, almost haunted. "You really don't see it, do you? Every step you've taken, every choice you've made, someone has been watching." "Watching me?" Marcus's chest tightened. "Not just watching," the man said. He limped another step forward, his boots scraping on the dusty concrete. "Judging." The folder in Marcus's jacket suddenly felt heavier. His father's name, Richard's, Victoria's, all tangled in the same file. Judging him for what? "Why me?" Marcus demanded. "Why my father?" The scarred man's scar twisted as he clenched his jaw. For a moment, Marcus thought he saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "Because you were never supposed to end up here. Your father, he made a choice that night. He thought he could shield you from it, thought he could break the cycle." Marcus's pulse hammered in his ears. "What cycle?" The man shook his head slowly. "You're asking the wrong questions." He turned slightly, his silhouette framed by the faint sliver of daylight leaking through the warehouse cracks. "Ask yourself this instead. Why would Victoria, of all people, offer you marriage over an engine? Why you? Why then?" Marcus froze. The challenge, the taunt, the moment that started everything. "Because she's cruel," Marcus spat. "Because she wanted to humiliate me." The scarred man's laugh was low, bitter. "Humiliation? No, that was the invitation." Marcus felt a chill crawl down his spine. "Invitation?" The man's voice dropped lower, softer, like he didn't want the walls to hear. "You've already passed, but passing isn't the end, Marcus. It's the beginning." Marcus's breathing quickened. "Beginning of what?" The scarred man's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You'll find out when you stand in front of Richard Hale. Just remember, he's been waiting for you a very long time." Before Marcus could respond, a sharp noise cracked outside, the sound of a car door slamming shut. The scarred man's eyes flicked to the entrance. His expression hardened. "We're out of time." Marcus's throat tightened. "Who's out there?" The man didn't answer. He just leaned close enough for Marcus to see every line of his ruined face. "Choose wisely. What you do next decides whether you live like your father or die like him." And then he slipped back into the shadows. Marcus stood alone in the warehouse, the silence pressing down, the folder burning against his chest, and footsteps approaching from outside. Who just arrived at Rockland Avenue? Was it Richard himself, finally making his move? Or had Victoria sent another wave of enforcers to cut Marcus off before he uncovered more? And what exactly had Marcus passed without even knowing it? The test wasn't over. It was only tightening its grip. The sound grew louder, heavy boots crunching gravel, voices low but sharp, cutting through the still morning air. Marcus pressed his back against the wall of the warehouse, his pulse thundering. Whoever it was, they weren't here by accident. "Check inside," a man's voice barked. The door groaned as it was pushed open, the rusted hinges screaming. 3 men stepped into the warehouse, their dark suits out of place against the dust and rot. Their eyes scanned the shadows like hawks searching for prey. Marcus gripped the pipe tighter, his chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. One of the men pointed toward the desk. "Folder's gone. He's here." Marcus's stomach dropped. They knew. "Spread out," the leader ordered. Their footsteps echoed against the concrete, drawing closer. Marcus could hear the jingle of keys, the click of a safety being switched off a gun. He slid along the wall, keeping low, every muscle in his body screaming to run but knowing one wrong move would get him killed. The first man passed within feet of him, flashlight beam cutting across the floor. Marcus held his breath, the pipe slick in his grip. "Clear here," the man muttered, turning toward the crates. Marcus saw his chance. He darted for the far end of the warehouse, but his boot struck a loose bottle. It rolled across the floor, clinking loud enough to slice through the silence. "Over there!" A beam of light caught him. Shouts erupted. Marcus bolted. He weaved through the crates, heart hammering, as gunshots cracked behind him. Sparks flew as bullets tore into metal and wood. Splinters grazed his cheek. The exit was just ahead, the thin strip of daylight spilling under the warped door. "Don't let him out!" Marcus hurled himself at the door, shoulder slamming into the rusted steel. It burst open, daylight blinding him as he stumbled into the open lot. Gravel sprayed as he sprinted toward his car. Another shot rang out. Glass shattered as his rear window exploded. He didn't look back. He dove into the driver's seat, twisted the key, and the engine roared to life. Tires screamed as he tore down Rockland Avenue, the men spilling out of the warehouse behind him. their shouts swallowed by the growl of his engine. Only when the warehouse was a shrinking shadow in the rearview mirror did Marcus let himself breathe. His hands trembled on the wheel. The folder pressed against his chest like a ticking bomb. Victoria wasn't just toying with him anymore. She was hunting him. Why did Victoria's men risk ambushing Marcus so openly? What was inside that folder that terrified her enough to silence him now? And if she was desperate to stop him, what kind of truth was Richard still guarding? The truth she didn't want him to hear? Marcus had escaped this time, but the next move would bring him face to face with the man at the center of it all. Marcus drove for miles without stopping, the folder a weight on his chest heavier than the steering wheel in his hands. His rearview mirror showed nothing but empty road now, but his pulse hadn't slowed. Every shadow on the roadside looked like a car tailing him. Every flick of headlights felt like a trap. He finally pulled into a run-down diner off the highway. Neon lights buzzed faintly in the morning haze, the open 24 hours sign flickering like it had given up years ago. Inside, the place smelled of burnt coffee and fried bacon. A waitress with tired eyes poured him a cup without asking, her name tag reading Carla. She didn't ask questions either. That was the kind of diner this was. People came here to disappear. Marcus slid into the back booth, his hands shaking as he set the folder on the table. He opened it again, spreading the yellowed documents across the formica surface. His father's name, Richard Hales. And there, like a serpent hiding in the grass, Victoria's signature, scrawled in black ink, Project Halcyon. He ran his finger over the date, 2002. Rockland Avenue. His father had been here. His father had signed something that tied him to Richard and Victoria, and then, months later, he was gone. Carla set down a plate of eggs and toast. "On the house," she said quietly, giving him a look that wasn't quite pity, but wasn't curiosity either. "Thanks," Marcus murmured, though he didn't touch it. His appetite was gone. He stared at his father's signature, then whispered under his breath, "What did you do, Dad?" His phone buzzed on the table. A text. Unknown number. "You're running out of time. Come to the Hale estate, tonight." Marcus's stomach tightened. He didn't need to ask who it was from. Victoria. He looked down at the documents again, then shoved them back into the folder. He had no choice now. If he kept running, he'd be hunted until they found him. If he wanted answers, if he wanted the truth about his father, about the so-called test, about the conspiracy swallowing him whole, he had to face Richard Hale himself. Marcus paid the bill with crumpled cash and walked out into the gray morning. His car sat waiting, the cracked windshield reflecting the weak sunlight. He slid behind the wheel, folder on the passenger seat like an unwanted passenger. As the engine turned over, he whispered the words that had been circling his mind since the garage. "This ends tonight." What would Marcus find waiting at the Hale estate? Richard's truth or Victoria's trap? And why had she invited him, rather than simply finishing the hunt with her men? The next move wasn't about survival anymore. It was about revelation. And revelation always carried a price. Night fell heavy over the Hale estate. The mansion rose like a fortress at the end of a winding drive, its windows glowing faintly against the dark, its iron gates groaning open as Marcus's car approached. He parked, his heart pounding, the folder tucked under his arm. The silence here was different. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of power. Every stone, every shadow seemed to watch him. Inside, chandeliers bathed the marble floors in golden light. Portraits of stern-faced men lined the hall, Hales of generations past, each one staring down with cold authority. At the far end of the hall, sitting in a leather chair as though he had been waiting all night, was Richard Hale. Older now, silver hair neatly combed, but his presence filled the room. His eyes met Marcus's, steady, unreadable. "You look just like him," Richard said at last. His voice was calm. Too calm. Marcus's throat tightened. "Why?" Richard leaned back, steepling his fingers. Because your father asked me to protect you. And sometimes, Marcus, protection requires sacrifice. Marcus slammed the folder onto the desk. Sacrifice? You left him to die. Richard didn't flinch. No, he chose it. He knew what the project demanded. He signed, and so did she. Victoria just wants you to think otherwise. Marcus's mind spun. His father chose? Victoria lied? Or was Richard lying now? Richard stood, slowly, deliberately. You've already passed the test. The question is, will you carry it forward, or will you burn everything your father died to build? Marcus's chest heaved. What if I refuse? Richard's lips curved into a faint smile. Then, Marcus, you'll finally learn what it means to be your father's son. The doors behind Marcus creaked open. Victoria stepped inside, her heels echoing across the marble. Her smile was sharp, dangerous. Well, she said softly, shall we tell him the whole truth, Richard, or let him keep guessing? The two locked eyes, a silent war passing between them. Marcus stood trapped in the middle, folder in hand, questions in his heart, and two powerful forces pulling him toward opposite fates. The silence stretched, and then Richard spoke. He's ready. Marcus's breath caught. Ready for what? Was Richard protecting Marcus, or grooming him to inherit something darker than he could imagine? Was Victoria the enemy, or the only one willing to expose the real truth? And what exactly had Marcus passed? A test of loyalty, of strength, or something far more dangerous? The night ended, but the story didn't. For Marcus, the real reckoning had only just begun.